This is Dave, and today's big hairy idea is how to eat forbidden fruit. Continuing our theme of diving into these stories of Genesis, of Adam and Eve, let's hit the most famous one of all, that of the eating of the forbidden fruit. Now, there's a whole backstory to it that you probably don't know about. Because if you look at the text, you see a very interesting thing happens. You see, God says to Adam, "You shall not eat this fruit, otherwise you shall die." The fruit, by the way, is not an apple, but it is forbidden. "You shall not eat this forbidden fruit, or else you will certainly die." But later, we see that Eve talking to the snake, and she says to the snake that God said to us, "Don't eat the fruit or even touch the tree, or else you will die." That's not what God said. God said, "Don't eat the fruit." Where did this whole touch the tree thing come from? Well, according to the Midrash, this is the oral tradition we have that gives backstory to these stories that kind of elucidate these biblical stories. It says that Adam thought he was going to be really smart. He said, "You know what? We shouldn't eat the fruit. Therefore, why don't I make an extra prohibition? I will tell Eve that we're not even going to go touch that tree. We're not going to get close to the tree. That way we won't be tempted into accidentally eating the fruit or just lose control. We'll just stay far away from that tree." So he tells Eve that God said, "Don't eat the fruit or touch the tree." He was trying to be smart. He was trying to add an extra layer of protection on top of them. But he didn't point out to Eve the distinction between the two, and that's where he failed. Because when Eve says to the snake, God says, "Don't eat the fruit or touch the tree," the snake says, "Oh, is that what God said? Really?" And he pushes Eve into the tree. Eve smacks off against the tree, and the snake says, "See, you touched it. You didn't die. You know what? That other bit about eating it, that's not true either. God just doesn't want you eating the fruit because then you'll become all-powerful like God." And of course, the snake's plan works. Eve eats the fruit. Everything goes downhill from there. But what's interesting about this is we actually say that what Adam was trying to do was a really good thing. It was a smart idea. We actually encourage people to make fences around the Torah, make fences around our prohibitions, things we don't want to do. We make fences around them. So what are some examples? So of course it says in the Bible you shouldn't commit adultery, and that's a bad thing and something I want to stay far away from. So let's say I'm at a conference and I'm talking to a woman having a networking conversation. And she says, "You know what? Why don't we head back to my room and we can sit down and we can talk some more?" Well, that's something I wouldn't feel comfortable doing. We actually have a separate rule, not a Torah rule, but a rabbinic rule that says, you know what? A man and a woman who are not married shouldn't seclude themselves together in a room because who knows what could happen then. It's kind of like saying, don't put yourself in a difficult circumstance, a circumstance that might even lead to something, because you never know what is going to happen. So the rabbis kind of created this extra rule, this extra protection that says, don't even go that far, therefore you won't go to the prohibited level. Another example, we don't eat milk and meat together. So we try not to have them on the same table. That's another fence. That doesn't say in the Torah don't have milk and meat on the same table, but we say you shouldn't even be sitting down and having milk and meat together, or you might just absentmindedly be adding a little bit of Parmesan to your burger and be like, "Oh, I wasn't thinking." So it's important we create an extra step. We create these fences. So we encourage that. But it's crucially important to know the difference between an actual prohibition and the fence. Create fences around yourself. One that we encourage people with all the time. If you're trying to eat healthier, don't have junk food in your house at all. That's a good example of a practical fence. Don't make it so that, when you open the fridge, you're going to see all this junk food and you just have to have the self-control to avoid it. Just take it, throw it away, get it out of the house. Don't put yourself in a difficult situation. That's a great fence. But it's still vitally important to know the difference between what is a fence and what is not the fence. Because sometimes things come in conflict with each other. Sometimes it's impossible to keep one thing and to keep another. Let's say that example I was having about somebody invited me up to her room. I would absolutely say no, because that's one of the fences we make around adultery. I don't want to put myself in a difficult situation. At the same time, say I was a doctor and I was in the room next to somebody, and we'd spoken beforehand, and she knew I was a doctor. And that night, she calls up and saying, I think I'm having a heart attack. I feel really bad. I called 911, but it might take a while to get here. Can you come over? I wouldn't be like, well, no, an Orthodox man is not supposed to be into a room with a woman. I wouldn't do that because you know what? Saving a life is a giant priority. And it's important to know that not being together with somebody, okay, that's a fence. But it's not going to push away something that is a giant priority of saving a life, for instance. So it's important to know when something is really an actual prohibition, a high-level thing, and something is just actually a fence. It doesn't mean if you're trying to lose that weight, like we said, okay, get all that food out of the house. It doesn't mean never go to anybody's house that has junk food in that house. Sometimes you're going to have to say, okay, you know what? I know the essential thing is to not eat that. But I don't have to be so particular and say, wow, if you have ice cream in your house, I won't even come over to visit. Like, you don't have to ruin your relationships in order to be keeping a fence. Even though you might want to have very strict rules according to like the actual rule, the actual priority. So it's vitally important to know what is a fence, what is not a fence. And Adam was doing the smart thing when he told Eve, let's just completely stay away from that tree entirely. But what he needed to do, what would have made the whole thing different, was he needed to pull Eve in and said, God said, don't eat the fruit. So let's the two of us agree we won't even go near the tree. As long as Eve knew that the not go near the tree was a device that they came up with to protect themselves from breaking the rule, and not the rule itself, they would have been fine. Because they confused the actual priority, the actual rule, with the fence, that led to their downfall. Bonus question, put it in the comments if you have the answer. What was the forbidden fruit? According to Jewish tradition, it was not an apple, but the Talmud tells us 4 different possibilities that it could be. Do you know any of them and the reasons for why we actually say that was one of the fruits, what possible fruits? Put it in the comments below if you know. Take care.